seers of the world. We're not just seeing, we're actually bringing it all in and metabolizing it. And a lot of times our focus is out there. And the focus of this class is in here. What's the story that's living inside of you? So I'm going to invite us to begin by placing your feet on the earth, taking your two front fingers, your thumb and your forefinger, placing them together. This is the mudra, yes, of wisdom, so they say. So really inviting this presence of wisdom into your beingness, and you can just let them rest on your thighs or wherever is close to you. And as you close your eyes with this mudra of calling forth the wisdom that lives inside of you, and maybe not just the wisdom that lives inside of you, but the wisdom that you have access to. And so I invite you, really feeling your feet on the earth, feeling your feet on this ground. Can you feel that connection? And as you feel that connection, it takes a moment, right, to really be aware of this most obvious thing that's in most of our lives. But how attuned can you become to that connection? Without opening your eyes, do you know the material that your feet rest upon? And as you're bringing yourself fully present to what your feet are resting upon, I invite you to become aware of your breath at the same time. Breathing all the way down to the bottom of your belly. As you breathe in, breathing in this intention to be alive and aware and activated with the wisdom that lives within you and the wisdom that you have access to. And as you exhale, just exhaling out anything that's in the way. Maybe all these stories already emerged that got in the way of you even saying that you can access your own wisdom or the wisdom around you. So just exhaling out anything that's in the way of that story. And again, inhaling to receive. And exhaling any stories that are in the way of you coming into that full state of receiving. I'm going to invite you to continue to stay present with your internal breath as we merge our connection with what's also become aware of what's outside of us, at the bottom of our feet, and becoming aware of what is the material that we are standing upon. It might be wood, it might be plastic, it might be linoleum, it might be rug, fiber. And as you become aware of what's holding you, how attuned can you engage your imagination to understand the raw material that was created from? Can you take yourself back to the original source of what it was? For me, with my feet on wood, it's not so hard to imagine the tree that it came from, and that this is where my feet rest today, and the journey that tree went on. And so by feeling my feet just on this floor, not even on the earth, but on this floor, there's this connection to life. So I invite you into that presence and the raw materials that you are resting on right now. And as you continue your breath, I invite you just to come into this consideration of what are you here for today? What brought you here? What called you here? What is going on in your relationship to stories and being a storyteller is calling you into an hour-long journey into this realm of sacred storytelling. I'm going to begin with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi, who taught us to remember that our thoughts generate words, and our words generate actions, and our actions generate habits, and our habits generate character, and our character breeds destiny. And that's what we're here for today, to go on a journey of that relationship between language and action, and how we live our lives and how our destiny is formed by the words and the stories that we tell and the stories that we allow to live inside of us. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about me, and then we're going to dive in. And what I'll say is that I absolutely adore getting to hear from all of you. It's my favorite. It's my favorite part. And I actually have you all in gallery view. I just had to put it on speaker view so that the video was working that way. But I love hearing from you. And what you say and what you bring really feeds all of us. It nourishes all of us, and it deepens our conversation. So I invite you into that deep kind of listening, so that when you know that it's your turn to speak, or when you feel that little, we all have different visceral responses, right? Some of us start getting really nervous, the heart starts pounding, we can barely hear, the static gets loud, But like, if you start to feel that, if you know that something is coming forth, just to know that your voice, there are going to be places when I very literally ask questions. And I'm really authentically asking for your response. And there's two different ways to meet these kinds of moments. There's the one when we know what we're going to say, and the answer is within us, and we can just speak it. And then there's this other thing that happens, that tickle that I just mentioned, that thing where you're like, something's coming, but I don't know what it is. And for an introvert, that moment might kind of stop, because introverts, the way that we operate is that we have to know exactly what we're going to say before we open our mouths to speak. And if we're an extrovert, we don't need to know what it's going to say, because we will figure it out as we speak it, because that's how we learn. But I'm going to invite you into a state that both introverts and extroverts can find themselves in, where the introverts can emerge up a little bit and the extroverts can slow down a little bit, and to meet in the middle in this state of eloquence. And eloquence is that place where you don't have to know what you're going to say. It's not about being clever. It's not about being right. I'm one of those people that like to be clever and I like to be right. Eloquence is a different art form. It's about allowing yourself to slow down, to feel yourself connected to the earth, open for, I'm going to use this word spirit. I could say divine. I could use the word the muse. I could use the word ancestors. We could use the word God. I'm going to ask you to be open to understanding what is the word that you use for what I'm using as a universal concept of that creative life force. So what is that creative life force, the name that you give to it, and allowing that to open and come through you and to speak through you. And that's how I understand what eloquence is. And that came to me through the teacher of Stephen Jenkinson. I just love that definition. It's not about being clever, it's about something else. So there we go. So a little bit about me. By now you know that my name's Leah Lamb. I hail from a very tiny town in Waterbury, Vermont. I had the total delight on getting to run wild in the wind and the creeks and the horses and ducks and chickens and goats, on a farm. And I also moved a lot as a child. I moved between Vermont, Virginia, and New York City, and all that moving around. I wouldn't wish that on any little person. And one of the things that really got me through was that I had one thing that was always with me. I had stories. I always had books, and they always got me through those strange moments of when children always aren't so nice to the new kid. And they became they became my savior. They became my friends. They became my travel buddies. They became my teachers. And I truly, truly, truly fell in love with story. But there was also something else that happened, which was that because I was allowed to be raised in the wilds of Vermont, I got to start listening, and I began to get other kinds of friends that I wouldn't know how to name until I was much later. But I became friends with the land. I became friends with the creeks, became friends with the trees. And those allies and that kind of listening was a very part of the fabric of what creates my perspective on life. I was very lucky. I had parents who spotted some talent in me in terms of writing and storytelling and theater, and I was cultivated. And I was brought into a school of the performing arts, and I was also kind of identified as a young up and coming thing when I was in high school and I was invited into a local theater company. And so I got to really enter into the world of performance and the world of theater, really being trained by master teachers at a very young age. And then something happened. I had my best friend committed suicide when I was in high school. And I went to that place that had always been home for me, which was writing. And I wrote a play. And that play was produced in a playwriting festival. I got to see it on the stage. And that's when I learned that what you put out into the world comes back. I learned that there was great responsibility with storytelling. And that while we might use it and work with it and collaborate with it to make sense of the world, to bring meaning, to move through grief, that when we put out into the world, we are then responsible to hold what it calls back. I went off to New York City. I studied with Sandy Meisner and I got to work off Broadway and do all that. And I soon learned that it actually wasn't enough, that there was something happening in that space. There was an energy that was being cultivated in that place of theater and of the arts. And I wanted to understand how to work with it for social change. I was very committed to environmental justice and community organizing and social justice, and it wasn't enough just going into these black rooms and entertaining. And so I ended up getting a degree in experiential education and well, environmental education through performance from Prescott College. And again, I got this opportunity to go into the wilds and I got to work as a wilderness guide and understand group process and understand initiations and understand this piece that was missing from all parts of my life, this kind of weaving together of culture and community and how to be together and how to support each other through the hardest of moments and times through this confluence of being in the wilderness. And I really learned about my love of working with youth at risk. I ended up getting a master's in social work. And I got this master's in social work because I was deathly afraid. I was very afraid that I would never be able to make it as an artist. I knew that my heart was there. I knew that my love was there. I knew that my care was there. I knew that my brilliance was there. But I was really afraid that I would not be able to um, support myself. And so I got the SAFE degree and I got a master's in social work because it fulfilled enough of my care for social justice, my care for participating in the world. And I figured that there might be one day some way I could bring them together. But in my last moments of graduate school, my body spoke up and it said that I could no longer walk a path that was not truly mine. And it spoke up in the way of a tumor arriving on my neck. So it was not to be ignored. It's a whole other story. And I was told I was a very good chance I could lose my voice. So I understood what I had. I understood the gift of a voice. And when that happened, and when I got through that situation, I walked on time with my fellow cohorts because I was very stubborn. But the message came clear that it was really about weaving the path, weaving together, and not separating off a part of myself. There's some part of my soul that was going to go into a complete state of refusal. So I would say that I spent the next decade of my life trying to understand how to weave these two things together. That magic that's happening in that world of the arts, of theater, of story, and this engagement in the times that we're living in social justice, environmental justice, community organizing. You know, how do we meet the Me Too movement? How do we cultivate this? And that journey took me to working with Al Gore and producing and hosting the Green Channel at his television network. It took me to creating story ceremonies with over 200 people in cities around our country, looking at the story of the witch and how so many people have memories of it not being safe for them to speak out, you know, and how are these old stories haunting us? How can we heal it? It took me to creating the story of Medea with a bunch of advanced students, where we looked at creating forgiveness ceremonies with a group of over 200 people facing each other eye to eye. And what I started to see was that there was this thing that is yearning out of our times, that there is this deep desire for this emergence of how to be human beings, and not how to be human doings. And as we stand as creators, as we stand as storytellers, the original form of humans, this basic skill teaches us everything about how to meet the times. To me, it is the ultimate mystery school. It teaches you all about connection. It teaches you all about the tools of the mind. It teaches you all about the neuroscience. It teaches you about connection. And it teaches you really at this time when we're so obsessed with change, right? We're either running towards it or running away from it, either praying for a transformation or running from climate change. They're same thing. So it's like it is one of the most key tools that I understand about how to truly be a part in a not just having change happen to you, but engaging it as an active role and being part as a change maker. So that's a little bit about where I hail from and my approach to how I came to talk and really understand story as a sacred art. So let's talk about some of the most ancient understandings of language. The Hawaiians say that words are so powerful that they can speed up the world or slow it down. And if you haven't had a chance to see hula, go on YouTube after this class and you're going to see a culture that's still intact and understands the power of their prayer embodied. It's a very powerful thing to witness. Sicilians say that words are so powerful that they can poke a hole in the universe. I always think about that, when you start feeling the heat rise in a conversation, and that whatever you say can't be taken back. There's actually an advanced term in high physics that says when a word has been spoken into the place, it lives there forever. So we can repair, but we can't take back. The Maoris say that words don't describe a thing, that they are the thing. The Australians say that stories from our past must be sung to our present in order for the future to exist. The Japanese have a word called kotodama, and it speaks to the consciousness that happens before it becomes a word. All the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I say that again because it always just lands in me in a different way as we understand this great inquiry of what are humans' unique role on this planet? What is Earth's unique role in our universe? And to me, this one little thing is a key to our exploration of this question. That all the ancients agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So we understand that we're on a creator planet, right? This planet, she creates and creates and creates. And as humans, we are creators and we are co-creators, and we co-create through our language. We can take that kotodama, we can take that concept, we can bring it into word, and we can make that word into matter. It's extraordinary. I always think about the first people that made airplanes, how could they convince someone to they could see it, right? They could imagine it. We're not gonna even go where imagination comes from. That's a whole other class. Okay, so, and I love this quote that I'm gonna bring to you. Trees are shaped by the wind, but people are shaped by words. That's by Joan Aitken. Okay, so let's dive into what is a story? And I'm really asking this question. What is a story? And you can raise your hand and share it out loud, or you can place it in the chat box. Yes, Fred.
I always like to quote Neil Gaiman's definition of story, which is anything you can say where people keep listening and they feel like it was worthwhile to have listened when you stop.
Okay, so a couple of things in there. I love Neil Gaiman. So we've got that it captures people, is what I'm hearing you say. That they listen. They're not only listening, but there's also a value. So it's the distinction between me saying, yeah, I got up this morning and brushed my teeth, and then I brushed my hair and had my chia pudding, and then I looked out the window. That's not a story, right? Sometimes people will engage us with these lists, But a story, there's something in it that has value. There's something in it that captures people, that captures their imagination. John Steinbeck says story has to be about the listener, or it will not last. Actually, I think he said the reader. Excuse me. So it's like, so when we're telling a story, there's a collaboration, there's a connection that's happening, and it's between us. So I'm not talking at you. I'm talking for you. It's a different orientation. Okay, what else? What else is a story? Okay, so Andrea is saying that a story is a vehicle. A vehicle, right. It can carry things inside of it. It can carry values. It can carry hate. It can carry fear. It can carry joy. It can carry the sensation of peace. One of the ways that these stories carry this is, right, it's coming through our resonance, it's coming through our vibration. So, as a storyteller, my first question I always ask our storytellers is, what are you in service to? I'm actually going to ask you to pause and really ask yourself this question. And if you want to post it in the chat box, I invite you to. What are you in service to? Are you in service to love? Are you in service to connection, to kindness? I mean, we're always in service to all different kinds of things, some of them consciously or unconsciously. And what you're in service to is going to carry the resonance. Your story is going to carry the resonance of what you're in service to, because it's carrying your heartbeat into the world. And so the more you understand what you're in service to and what your true gifts are, and we say gifts, I'm talking about the gift of how to heal a broken heart. I'm talking about the gift to know what it takes to survive grief. We have so many gifts that don't necessarily get recognized by the consumers, but these things get to come through these are the things that get to be honored and recognized and seen through stories. That's why I love stories. Stories actually escape the entire construct of our consumeristic world and give us a whole new way of being in relationship to each other. Rather than say, what's your job? We should say, what's your story? Okay, so we're saying, Merritt's saying that a story is enchantment. Right. So you can cast spells with stories. Um, Mary's saying that a way for the wiser ones to share around the fire, but why can't we all share around the fire and share our wisdom around the fire and see what happens? It's one of the things that when I worked as a wilderness guide, we did sit around the fire a lot, and there's a culture of listening that happens there. Where people kind of assume that if you're going to open your mouth, you're going to have something to say, and they get real quiet and they start listening. People start listening, you really better have something to say. It's different culture and community that we can cultivate all the time with each other. That we can create this practice of bringing our friends together around the talk story and come into that space of listening. Oh gosh, I hope I can pronounce your name right. I hope if I'm not, tell me. San Kelp. Stories are meant to illustrate the trajectories of transformation. Wow. So what you're speaking to is that stories have a job. You're saying that they're meant for something, and I'm going to say that there's a collaboration that happens between the story and the storyteller, and that there's the intention that what is the story in service to, and then what is the storyteller in service to, and sometimes they collaborate and sometimes they don't. So yeah, so it's like, but what I'm hearing from you, Sankalp, is that the stories you want to tell, that you are someone. I'm hearing someone speak that they of being in service to change and transformation. Loka is saying it's connection to self, others, and the earth. Right. And here's what I want to say. One of the magic things about storytelling is that it's a way of giving a transmission. I've gotten to be in the room with Martin Shaw, who's an extraordinary bard of our time, and he is from the UK, and it's like they're raised, like, I don't know, like they're just like the soil there carries stories in them, and people still feel them, and the relationship to story is so different. The threads of lineage haven't been cut, and getting into his presence, it's like there's this intensity and of the connection of all the things. And when I got to hear him speak story, all of a sudden I got to understand the connection between earth and story. I don't know how to explain it. I thought that all these parts of me were disparate and they were separate. And when I got to hear someone, an old bard, talk story, I got to understand and I got to feel the transmission that connection to story is connection to earth, is connection to humans, and it's connection, it's the threads that are bringing us all together. And I can explain it, or you can feel it, but thank you for bringing that point up. It's one of the things that story does. Um, all right, Val is saying a story can take us away from our own situation, show us other ways of living and thinking. It can reassure us that we are not alone, right? Wow. In our feelings, and show us other ways of maneuvering relationships, right? So it's like it can show us another way. I love that. And right, like what do we understand about so many of the massive social change movements? As we've seen people with different sexual identities come out, we're like, wait a second, there's a lot of different people that have that. They're not alone. As we see people with different race relations come out and start talking about how they've been treated by a domineering, culture. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And so it's so important to tell our stories because if we're feeling it, we're not alone. And you can liberate that for someone else. It's a gift. I say we're not speaking for those who don't want to hear us, and we're not speaking for those who aren't ready to hear us. We're speaking because there's something inside of us that also lives in others. When we have the courage to speak it, and if we have the privilege to speak it, then it's a great gift that we give to others because it wakes it up and it gives them permission to speak it in their life too. And it spreads like that. Um, you guys are keep going on, and I'm going to keep going on too. So, you guys have been beautiful and poetic and expressive in the largeness of story. I'm going to get really tiny in my unpoetic expression and go into this idea that since humans refer to themselves in the latest technology, I'm going to use that way of metaphor. What is metaphor but the language of spirit, right? What is a myth but the earth speaking out loud? So when we're looking at metaphors, we're hearing the language of spirit, the language of the earth coming to us through the stories. And now we're talking about a story is an operating system. And it's an operating system that teaches us our belief systems, our values, what we believe is possible, teaches us expectations, what roles we should play. Now look at the programming, right? I love it. This is what I love about words. They don't let you down. If you ever are curious about a word, go get your etymology dictionary and start looking it up. So we have all the words are describing everything. So the programming in our television and our movies, what are you consciously, unconsciously receiving? What does, I don't have a stat on me today, but it came up in a previous conversation this morning about all the violence that we see against women in television. What does that train women and men to expect? What does it normalize, for a culture? So when it's shown to us over and over and over again. So I want to invite you to start really, really examining the stories that are around you. So if we understand that that's what, basic unpoetic expression of what a story is, let's jump into this other realm because I can see that we have so many deep thinkers today. Um, what is a sacred story? What creates a sacred story? Right, it honors a healing process. Right, so once again, we got to that it's doing something. It's bringing peace, says Melissa. Mary's saying that it brings children a value of life. It affirms life, said Mary again. Andrea saying that it holds life, the light of preciousness. Wow, so there's a lot of theme around life in this. I love this. Maria saying it has an intention and reverence. It's a shaper of consciousness into intrinsic connection, says Mel. Katie's saying that it's got soul purpose. So look, some of the patterns and words that I'm hearing you speak to is life, consciousness, soul, connection. And so what do we say when we're calling on this word sacred? Part of it's a bit of a trap because as soon as you call one thing sacred, you're inherently saying that something else isn't sacred. you know, just by using the word. It's kind of weird. And yet, what does sacred mean? It says, I see the divine, I see the life, I honor and bring reverence to the life that lives in you. you know. And so I call on that language because I think so many of us live in cultures, not all, but many of us live in cultures and communities that don't live with that kind of reverence of seeing and respecting and honoring the life in all things. So we call on that word sacred to call that way back into being. You know, hopefully we'll work that word out of a job. So you don't need it anymore. It's just a way of being, you know. So when we think about sacred story, now we're saying, okay, it's a story that has a life inside of it. We go back to that idea that it's a vehicle, right? And that has a life force inside of it that's serving life, right? It brings peace, it brings joy, it brings communion, it brings connection. It brings a lot of this word that's coming up today is transformation. You know, it brings healing, it brings medicine. It might help you see something that you've never been willing to see before, but somehow you can look at it because you've got the courage to whatever has come through this story, you know. Um, and it's a story in service of life. Okay, so what's on the flip side of this? On the flip side of this is a zombie story. Okay, a zombie story is a story that's not in service of life. This is a story that is on the take. It's planting fear. It's, you know, planting fear of the unknown. You know, what is it? It makes you kind of want to feel a little dead at the end. Perhaps it doesn't give in a vision. Perhaps it doesn't give you a vision of yourself in the future. I actually think those are very dangerous stories. So, and I want to be careful here because you can tell, you can look straight on at the things that aren't working in the world by creating a sacred story about them. And the sacred story will always include a couple of ingredients. It's always going to have beauty inside of it. Because what does beauty do? It feeds the soul. So, yes, you can take me to a scene in the Holocaust. You know, life is beautiful. What an extraordinary example of a sacred story. They take you straight into the Holocaust and they tell you about a beautiful love story. And that story will always be with me. You know, about how and sovereignty and the gift of love and the power of love. You know, there's so many beautiful things in that story. So I really want to invite you to really, you know, it's like putting on your goggles, like when you go snorkeling in the ocean, you know, and it's like if your eyes are closed and you're in the ocean, for me, I get all scared. You know, there's could be a shark anywhere, and I'm all tight and I'm like afraid and I'm not willing to go very far. But if I've got my goggles, I can dive down, I get to see all the pretty things, and it's a really joyful experience. It's liberating. So I really want to invite you into that same way into your consciousness of putting on your super spidey, you know, sacred storyteller goggles and start looking around your life and start spotting where are the sacred stories, where are the zombie stories, where are the stories that are begging to be healed in between. You know, and I want to be very careful when we talk about zombie stories because I don't think people are intentionally telling them. I think that we're coming into a state where we're really re-emerging to understand the power of story and our unique role in it. You know, and so when you ask, I always ask the people who come to me, what are you in service to? And if you're in service to making money, some strange stories might come out of you. You know, so I always want to ask you like consciously, what are you in service to? Because it's going to dictate the stories that come through you or inform. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to do a little exercise. I want to invite you to spot a zombie story that's living in your life. A zombie story. I want you to spot a zombie story and just think about, is there a story that is on the take? And it's a story that's informing negative thinking. Or just I'm not gonna even say negative thinking, I'm gonna say destructive thinking. And if you want, if some people might start thinking of them, I bet if you put them in the chat box and are generous that way, you're going to start inspiring other people to start seeing what zombie stories might look like. Right. So Cynthia's saying my recent breakup is my horror story. Okay. So it's, you know, and I'm just going to take this one just to play with it, and you can keep blowing them. It's like we can look at these moments in our life as great suffering, as being the worst thing um, that's ever happened. But if we're actually working with a way of storytelling and looking at the story of our life and how is our story being lived through us, now we can look at these moments that create great suffering, like a breakup, as an initiation. We just did a quick reframe. We're looking at the story through a different door. So if it's an initiation, we understand that there's something waiting for us on the other side, that there's something that our soul has chosen to come through. Okay? So now life isn't happening to us, we're actually participating in life. And now when we're looking at initiations, we're saying, oh, okay, well, there's got to be something that I'm going to have to be willing to let go of. Because there's something that's calling, that's a part of my soul that's calling to me that lives on the other side. So health crises. Wow, if we could only have more context of saying, wow, that's an initiation, you know. Right, Wendy's saying teachers aren't in it for the income. Oh my God, don't get me going. But the outcome and how that perpetuates public servants, right? So it's like, how many stories do we have that the people who are the deepest connectors, I had a, it's like that are artists, that are teachers, that are caretakers, are service positions that aren't to be highly valued. And how do we, those people who work in those worlds, perpetuate that? That's the question, right? So when we look at that, when we can grab the zombie story and say, "Oh, I'm carrying that story. How am I living into it?" Now we're beginning to come into that place of sacred play. How do I want to change a different role in that story? Um, oh my gosh, you guys have so many great zombie stories. Um, Story loops from the past. Yeah, okay. I'm just looking through here. Witness of discrimination in my workplace. Diana says that. And so I wonder, and you didn't say enough for me, but I'm going to insert my own kind of idea of it. When we witness discrimination, what happens there is, like, is there some part of us, if we don't, I'm not saying that you didn't, I'm just kind of playing with this. When we witness discrimination, and if there's a time when we don't take action, it's a great moment again to wonder and saying, what story am I in that can witness something that I've identified as discrimination, as not being a fair and just way of treating all people as equal, as the same being of respect and honoring, you know, and wonder what happens inside of you where you don't choose to speak about that thing. And so I want to pause for a moment and say, don't berate, don't get down on yourself, because the power is in that moment of wondering what happened, what story is activating, where silence is the chosen way. Again, I'm not saying that Diana is about that. I'm just going off of something that she inspired me to speak about. And that right there is kind of that's one of the core questions that's actually in the course that I'm going to tell you about when we get to the end of all this. So I want to give you a tool to work with, because this whole thing about being able to really, and I chose the zombie stories. So after class, I want you to go back and make a list of all the sacred stories, because we need to honor them too, right? Because they're right around us. When we name them and claim them, we amplify them, And the reason why we want to be able to get our hands on, those zombie stories is so that we can actually get in to change them. And so one of my favorite things to do is a sumo wrestling move, and you flip the story really quickly. And so um, and and so one way to flip a story is to look at that person, that being that's causing the most amount of suffering. Okay, the bad guy. Okay, and you can do this with a story that you've got, or you can just think about anywhere in the world, and anywhere in our political world that you've identified where that person's a bad guy. One of the things I love about storytelling is that we get the get out of jail free card, because we can see the story from every single perspective, right? So you just got to see through the lens of good and bad, okay? Now we're going to do the sumo wrestling sacred storytelling move, okay? And we're going to go into the let's expand a small story into a much bigger story move, okay? So we're going to go into the tell a bigger story. And you're going to take that person that's been identified as making suffering, and you're going to sumo wrestle it, turn it up on its back, and now it stands back up, and it arrives as the master teacher. Okay, now it's hard to do this with our exes, can be, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyway. This is a character building. How strong can you be in being willing to change, allow your mind. You're actually affecting and influencing your neurochemistry because our brains, it's like we get on these loops. Someone said that before. We get on a loop. And so when you actually invite your mind to think in a different way, sometimes you actually have to kind of it's like building any muscle. You have to really work at it and go do some repetitive action. So when you take something and you flip it on its back and you say, okay, now the person that was calling my suffering isn't, I'm not a victim to it, right? That was the shift, right? Now you can say, oh, I'm going to meet you face on. My soul is saying, oh, you've got something to offer me. You've got something to teach me. I just changed the story, you know, and there's an accountability that pops in. It's not so easy. And so you get this opportunity to say, what is this person offering me that no one else is willing to offer me? What can they give me that no one else can give me? This is one of the reasons why I love storytelling. Just so you know, I like telling beautiful, lovely, hot, sexy stories for adults. You know, I love telling stories like that. I love telling stories that bring people to connection, community. I love telling stories that give people the keys to liberate out of the world of fear. I love telling stories that bring people closer to love themselves and others. And this one little tool, this one little thing is an opportunity to also understand that, so oftentimes we think of storytellers as those ones where they're telling the story and they're on the stage, but really we're all storytellers. And either we're telling the story or the story is telling us. And they're telling us to either love or to hate or to be afraid or to get closer. And so look around all your stories and start understanding that if you're not telling the story, someone else will. And you're either going to be creating the roles or perhaps playing a role in someone else's story. So I want to give you a little quick journey of what does it look like to be a sacred storyteller. I'm going to actually share my screen with you and go into the realm of, hold on, it's all fun and games until you can't find your thing. Huh, I'm sorry guys, for some reason it's not showing me. Okay, we're not gonna do that. Never mind, you've just been spared a PowerPoint. But here's what I'll do is, there are a couple of key pieces that I do really think are critical to what is it to step onto the path of being a sacred storyteller and what distinguishes it from other kinds of storytelling. So one is that there's a relationship with that creative life force. So one of the first things that you do is you start courting the muse. And what does courting the muse mean? It's like it's creating beauty. It's creating a space for that creative life force to live among you. So that might look like an altar. It might look like beautifully tended flowers, but there's some part of you that's consciously saying, I'm going to feed and nourish the muse. I'm inviting you. Let's go on a hot date. And so how do you nourish those that love you? You feed them well. And so how would you feed that creative life force? And how do you invite that space? The next thing I would say is it's really stepping onto the path of psychic silence and making space for that psychic silence in your life. So what that means is you're saying, okay, it's like there's so many different stories, and if you can't see them, then how do you know which story is yours to tell and which story you're just kind of getting stuck repeating over and over again? And so this idea of psychic silence is being able to distinguish. Other people call this meditation. I call this psychic silence because when I'm creating, I want to be listening. I want to be hearing all those things. But I want to make sure that there's a good pathway that they can get through so it's not just my own noise that they're banging around in. There's that point that we've started to do, which was, actually we didn't do it, but name and claim and remove the barriers. So we started talking about it a little bit, in terms of when there's something happening, where is your voice? Where is your voice about the things that matter most to you? And why and where is it getting channeled to? And so one of the first things we need to do is we have to be able to name, claim, and see those barriers so that then we can start to have fun with them. And I love to have fun with them. And it's like you can jump over them, you can jump under them, you can move them over, you can take them apart and rebuild something else. And that's where engaging creativity is, again, this liberating, life force giving, powerful way of being together. you know and so I often say, like, working with storytelling in this way, it can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy, and I like to make the distinction with that. um, you can look behind you and get to know the old stories. If you don't know your old stories, how on earth are you going to know your new stories, right? The Australians talk about that, but look, we even see this in the climate change movement. This whole idea we have to get to a different planet because humans are out of alignment and we've done all these bad things. That's not a new story. This is one of the oldest stories on the planet. The Navajo tell the story, the Aztec tell the story, and it's these old creation stories about people that came from another place where humans were terribly doing it all wrong and they had to leave that place and go somewhere new. It's an old story. But if you don't know these old stories and you don't know where you are in relationship to them, so I feel like that's one of the first things to do when you really want to step onto this path is get to know your old stories, get to know the old creation stories. They're going to tell you how to live in these times. Um, and you have to find the stories that make you, and then you get to know what your gift is. When you really know what your gifts are, they amplify and they come through your stories. It doesn't matter if you're talking about two little squirrels. Your love and healing capacity just comes right through. And um, and then that's like really what it is to come in, is being able to give your gifts through the stories that you tell. Okay, so lastly, we're coming around our little adventure. I'm going to invite you to consider, where are you on your journey? So where are you on your storytelling journey? And this isn't about like getting on a stage and being a professional storyteller, because like I said, we're all storytellers. We're all at some point in the day, in our life, in our way, talking story and sharing our story and listening stories and absorbing stories. And so I'm going to give you a couple of different archetypes and share them in the chat box in terms of where you see yourself. And it can always be changing. It's not like we're always one thing. Are you that person that's the muse and you're like outrageously inspired? You're outrageously inspiring, and everyone just like gets super inspired around you, and that's a part of your magic. Are you the caterpillar, where you're holding the possibility of what you might become? The caterpillar stage is such a great stage because you can feel it. You can feel that something's inside of you. You can feel that it's waiting to emerge. But it's also a little bit of mystery yet, because you don't know what it is yet. You just know that it's there. Are you in the chrysalis? Which is really such a bummer. It's like, it's the great dissolve. If you've been in the chrysalis, you're like, man, this sucks. I actually wrote a really fun story about a caterpillar he lives in Central Park, this little New York caterpillar. He talks about transformation. He says it really sucks. I can't talk, I say it right here because he swears a lot too. Anyway, so, but it's the big dissolve, and so you've said yes, you've gone inside, everything has disappeared, it's melted, and you really don't know which way is up. But this all happened because you said yes to being the truth of what you are. And so it's really in this moment of being in deep relationship to the mystery. A lot of us really got to come into a deep connection with the mystery this past year. So it's pretty well known right now. Or are you in that stage of being a butterfly? You've got your wings and you're seeking that flower that you can pollinate. Stephen Jenkinson says that there's three stages of life. The first third of your life you spend cultivating your gifts. The second part of your life you spend finding those people that will receive your gifts. I always think about that with the butterfly. You can have the most beautiful wings, but if you don't have the flowers to pollinate, it's not that much fun. So I wonder, like, where are you in your stage? Um, and so, the other places that I always ask people, is in terms of where are you on your journey of being a storyteller? And that can be like, again, speaking on the stage or speaking community or speaking to your friends, but it's also, where are you in your own stage of talking story to yourself, of telling your own stories? Every morning were the stories that you wake up with telling yourself. And then I also ask you, since we're here in this realm, it's like, are you that person that is bringing in the new stories? You're going to, Joseph Campbell said, we need to look for the new myths. They're going to be here. Is the muse knocking on your door, constantly inspiring you, asking you to bring forth the new stories? Are you a healer? Are you here to look at the old stories and see which ones need to be healed? Or are you that cantadora? Are you a carrier of the old stories, making sure that they're being remembered? So, um, that's our class for today. And, the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because I really, in my heart of hearts, truly believe that stories are the keys to liberation. And when I was just on this, um, I was on a boat the other day, and the captain had sailed across the ocean many times, and I was super, it's something I've always wanted to do. So I was asking him, I was like, what are the three things that you learned, going across the ocean? I was trying to make a conversation. He said, doesn't matter how big the storm is, the only thing that you can control is your boat. And I was like, oh my God, that was such a good metaphor for life, you know? And and to me, that's what when you're a sacred storyteller is. It's like so much can go out in the outside world, but when you understand story, you have all the tools and all the skills that you need in terms of how to steer your own boat, but also how to build a really big boat for your community, how to build that connection, how to use your voice with purpose, how to understand the power of the medicine that comes through you and how it can influence those around you when you know that. So I want to leave you with something. I was walking through the woods the other day, and I've been selling a novel, and so entering into the business of selling creations. And it's a business, right? People are thinking about how they're going to profit off of you. And so because based on that, they say all kinds of really bizarre, amazing things to you. Like people will say the strangest things to you. And I was thinking there, and I'm like walking through the woods, and I'm like, oh God, you really got to believe in yourself to like get through this business. And the forest disagreed with me. This is what the forest had to say. It's okay. You can stop believing in yourself. That's a broken myth born out of a self help movement woven together from the broken threads of a country woven together by people whose lines of lineage were shattered, shambled, and shook, forgotten. Connection with the land, animals, plants, gods, and the deities from which they emerged from. Believing in yourself comes from people who lost the voices of the Menehune and the Lilliputians and the Gnome folk. It comes from forgetting what lives inside the voice of an owl, ignoring the resonance of wisdom in the whales, and not learning the language that lives in the whisper and wave of the leaves. I don't know if Einstein believed in himself. I'll bet my life he believed in his genius, the form of the unseen world that was living through him. So it's okay if you don't believe in yourself. Now you get to check the box that says you probably aren't a narcissistic megalomaniac psychotic and pat yourself on the back. What's worth the gnarly struggle to belief? What's worth developing the discipline and the skill of staying up long hours and waking up early and learning all the fancy moves that you need to win the sword fights with the critic and doubt and the comparing mind is believing that you have what it takes to be in touch with your ancestors, that you have what it takes to listen to the land and the rock beings and the feathered folk because you made your offerings and devoted yourself to the divine, and you've walked with the forest with a mind open to receiving. And you swam through the songs of whales, willing to engage their love because you have opened to be danced by the spirits of creation so that they might live through you. Now, that is the kind of thing that you can believe in because you know that you're not doing it alone, this creation thing. That kind of belief rattles the windows and shakes the floorboards and holds you strong and stable so when they question your offerings, your gifts, your talent, and they will, because that's what they do. So I'm just gonna end this now because it kind of comes down to this basic thing, because you believe in what lives through you. And so that's what I really invite you into, this deep question of what is begging to be lived through you. This is what gets me so excited. This is why I'm not just a storyteller writing my own books, but teaching classes, because I love bringing people to that threshold or standing with them next to them of when they're really cultivating the gifts that are coming through them. And I really believe in my heart of hearts that that's what we have to give to each other. And it's one of those things that will last far past anything else that has come along. The cars will go, the houses will go, but our stories might stay forever. And the more of us that have these skills and techniques of how to be together in these times, I really do believe that the better off we all will be. And so that was today's class. Thank you, Charisma. Thank you for coming. Fred, always good to see you. And Dominique, so many familiar faces. And Wendy, always great to see you guys. Um, and so if you are filled up and you're done, that was our class today. If something came alive in you and you're like, you've got this niggly naggly thing and your bones are vibrating and you're getting a little spicy and you're thinking about what stories you're going to tell and you're going to go make that list of sacred stories, I'm going to stay on a couple more minutes and I'm going to talk about a class that is coming up that starts tomorrow. So you have just enough time to, do a careening move through the door as it closes, and it's called Speak Your Spark. And this is the final class of a year-long program that's based on the idea of sanctuary, and that totally born out of COVID, as you can imagine, with this term, which is sanctuary, and that stories are a sanctuary that we can invite people into, and that as we create our sanctuaries, we understand how to allow these kinds of stories to live through us. So the sanctuary series actually went through all the different chakras of the body, and we went in there with our super sacred storytelling goggles to look at what were the different stories that were living in all the different parts of our body, and how can we engage the creative life force and that creative process to move it all through. I will attach. Um, oh gosh, Janelle's asking a great thing. I'm going to interrupt to say yes. There is another class coming up that is by the amazing Betsy Chase on documentary filmmaking. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to give you two different links. I'm going to give you guys the keys to the castle so that you can check this out. And what I would say is that if you do want these classes, to go grab the link now and go get in there, because there are things that you might want to do today to prepare for class tomorrow. So that's Speak Your Spark right there. And then let me get you this other link. And if you're watching on Facebook, I will go in a little bit and put these links in. So if you go to this next link, upcoming classes, there you go. Now you can find all the goods and all the different classes that are coming up. So as I talk about Speak Your Spark, so this class is all about the third chakra. So you're going to get really in there and say, okay, what's living in this part of my beingness? What are the stories that are living there? And what is the story of my story and how I use my voice in the times that I'm living in? And wow, is this not a time for us to be really alive in that question? And as you look at this class, what I did was I brought together 5 amazing guest master teachers from around the world, very different perspectives, very different backgrounds, who will look at how do you work with your voice, how do you work with your body, how do you meet the times that we're in with love, how do you use your voice about the things that you're passionate about. And so that's my actual favorite thing, and we're going to get to actually come up with all these fun creative ways for you get to speak about the things that you're most passionate about, and not in the ways that perhaps you think you should have or could have or would have in the past. And so the other things that happen is that, so the way that the class meets is that we meet on Tuesdays each day in the morning. You'll, as a group, we'll run through a series of different exercises that takes you on this journey of really understanding what are the barriers, what are the blocks, what is yours to communicate, and then gives you very specific ways to do that. At the same time, there's this other thing that's running underneath the class, and it's this idea of what is it to create sanctuary, and what is it to understand who you are as a creator and how you operate. You'll actually get to be led through a process called understanding your creator matrix. And what that means is you'll get to have an experience of creating a sacred space in your home. And you're like, wait, we were doing a storytelling class, but now now I'm doing something in my home. And that's just it, because when we make the conceptual and we put it into physical space and start relating, seeing how we relate to matter, we start to also understand how we relate to matter in our mind. And you get to see where the blocks and barriers in your creative process are made manifest through the metaphor of how you do things and making sacred space. So it's a really out of the box way to engage your whole self as a creator. And then you also, as we are going through this process, have these again 5 guest master teachers. We'll meet with them on Thursdays and Fridays. All the classes are recorded. I always say, people ask, can I participate live, or can I watch the recordings? You can always watch the recordings, and I'll also be really honest. If you really want to get the most out of the class, I will never, ever, ever, ever talk this much during a class. They're very experiential. You get to get in there, you get to do things, you get to be in small groups, you get to hear each other, you get to get feedback on what you've created, and you get to go really on a journey together. And so, really, coming live is the best, as Wendy can tell you. Um, and and what I would also add about this is that there's also an opportunity for you to work with a small group. And when I looked at these classes, and I've been teaching these classes for over 4 years, and for me, the pleasure is like, how do you give people the most bang for their buck? And like, how do they get the absolute most out of it? And what I realized is that it wasn't just about being in class together. It was about the weaving of cohorts and getting to really deepen and anchor in what we're learning together in a group in our personal lives. And so you also will be given a small group that you can work with outside of class. You don't have to. You might say, all I want to do is come to class. I don't want to do the small group stuff. But some people who really get into the small groups, they keep meeting. Like, I've got groups that started 3 years ago, and they're still meeting on their own because they met this other tribe of people that they were totally aligned and connecting in this creation process. So it's one of my favorite parts of the class, is that just, it's like the gift that keeps on giving from that part of it. Um, that's all I'm going to say right now about Speaker Spark. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, Val.
Is the one tomorrow, it's the last day of the class?
It's the first day of the class.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is it on Tuesdays? Is it always on Tuesdays? What time does it start?
it starts, I believe it's at, oh gosh. Oh, here, I can look on my link. It is, I think it's at 10 a.m.
Okay.
Pacific Standard Time, I believe. Yes, 10 a.m. on
It's
Tuesdays.
always on Tuesdays.
It's always on Tuesdays. We have guest teachers, so we have 5 guest teachers that are coming in, and they will be teaching on mostly Thursdays and Fridays and one Saturday. So again, with the guest teachers, you can come to those. You don't have to come to those. You'll always get the recording. So it's a Tuesday one that I would, if I was going to come to one class and make put that on my calendar, that's the one, because that's where you're going to be with your group cohort. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. I'm really interested, but I have an appointment tomorrow at 10:30 and it's scheduled every other Tuesday. So it's
Uh,
too late to shift tomorrow's, but
yeah.
um,
It's not this, like, if there's any class that you can miss and like watch the recording and it's not the end of the world, I would say it's the first class, because it's our introductory class. And you can, like, it's like, yeah, that's the only class I would say. It's, if you want to participate live, it's not the end if you don't get to watch that one live. If that makes sense.
thank you very much.
Then, Gail's saying, what about vision stories? Yes. So, the way that the school program works is that you have these sanctuary classes, which are really about, like, let's get in there. What's in the way of you telling the stories? And again, why did this come through? Is because I led this, 3 years I was teaching these classes, and I was seeing that people weren't breaking all the way through. Like, they were trying things, they were experimenting things, but they weren't coming into that, like, the full joy and pleasure of fully actualizing their storytelling. And so what happened was this process where we get to actually get in there and really meet the blocks and barriers and get to, like, really shift them and move them. And then after that, we go into a 4-week story skills class. And that is, so that's where Vision Stories comes into play. So the last story class of the year, I believe, is going to be Vision Stories, and that is a class where that you can take it with Speak Your Spark, and you register for them together. Um, you get, I don't know, a discount. I don't know exactly how much, but you get a discount. Or you can take just Vision Stories. And then you'll learn a very specific technique and way of how do you build a vision story and how do you create a new way of looking at the world that includes a role for all of us to be there. It's super fun, and we're only going to work on that one storytelling skill or technique. So it's a way for you to get into practicing your storytelling, creating your stories, writing your stories, and telling your stories. Um, the other thing that is going to be happening in May is something that's called the Story Starter Lab. And so you might be saying, maybe Speaker Spark is so specific that it's not your jam, or maybe Vision Stories, you want to do storytelling, but you're not interested in Vision Stories. Well, there's one more opportunity for you, which is the Story Starter Lab. And this is a place where you can come and you can just come dabble in the joy of creation. You're going to get a new, different opportunity each and every time to create a new story. You'll just be given story prompts. You'll get to share them in small groups. And if you're one of those people that says, I don't need to create new stories, I've got so many stories, I'm just trying to like get them out and to publish them, then we also have a workshopping section where we just come with your finished stories and you get to workshop them. So totally up for you to play with that. And then the last thing that I'll offer up is soul stories. And this is a process that I do one-on-one with people. And I work with people. It's a form of mystic storytelling, and it's a form of divination. And you get to receive your story as it's living in the mythic dimension. And you get to see the different archetypes and the different metaphors. And it's a way of exploring. It's a way of working with the guidance and the story as a tool to explore your own consciousness. So it's a absolute delight. I also do that once a month as a group on the new moon, and it's called Hour of the Wolf, and you can see all those things on the upcoming links. Okay, so I think that is it, and the last thing I'll say is I also work with people one-on-one, and so if you are feeling called and really are wanting some support getting across the threshold in what you're creating, that is one of my greatest pleasures as well, is working with people as they cross that threshold of bringing your creations into the world. All right, good to see you all again. And I wish you all the best. If you have any questions, I'll stay here for a few moments. Thank you for the waves. You're Mel, and to see you again. And hui ho. You can take yourselves all off mute. Dominique, did you have a question or were you waving? No, I'm going to get to see you soon. I'm very excited. Okay. Hi, Diane. Good to see you again.
Thank you. It's very inspiring.
Great.
Precious.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Joan speaking. So I think I am probably I don't have experience with stories. This is very exciting to me and very frightening. And so I'm just wondering, being a very much of a newbie, is Speak Your Spark a good place for me to jump in? Or is that a little bit too advanced and maybe I should start somewhere else?
No, it's the perfect place. It's literally what it's designed for.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's designed for anyone who's in that beginning stage where you're saying, well, I really want to find my voice and find my way of expression and find that story that unique story that wants to emerge through you. And specifically focused on, your passion, your purpose. And so it's an exploration class. And it's one of my favorite things in this class is our focus is on calling out each other's greatness and calling for each other's greatness. And so it's not about being perfect or doing it right or having the best technique or style. Like we've got other classes that are about developing technique and style. This is really about that first step of like, oh, what is emerging through me and how do I bring that through? So
Wonderful. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha. We're from Australia.
Yes.
Always so dark over there.
Well, let's see, 5:10 a.m.
Amazing. All right. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.